Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Morning, Rob.
Great.
Doing great.
Rob.
So, have we encountered many or much of the no compensation in our markets?
We're seeing more of it in Florida.
And as to your knowledge, Colleen, has any of our agents made offers on those properties yet?
Not to my knowledge. Nope.
And anybody take a competitive listing in the past 3 weeks since the settlement and had to come with the objection handling yet?
Oh, yes, we're seeing a lot of that.
Are the sellers asking about, do I have to pay?
The sellers are just saying they're not going to pay.
Well, I mean, we all have choices, right? Right, Colleen? We can make our choice whether we want to, work with sellers that don't pay, if that's the protocol. Miss Lori Caruso, have you had any? I see you there with your camera. You're on mute. You're on mute there, Lori. You hit the button there.
Rob, I took a listing recently and it never even came up in a conversation.
So it was just business as usual, right?
Yep.
Same here, Rob.
Same thing here, Bob.
But doesn't it feel good to be prepared if they don't ask? Isn't that great? All right, we'll give it a couple of minutes to get started. I see, is that Tiffany I see on there? It looks like somebody keeps kicking the can down for our rate relief, huh? Unmute for just a moment.
Sure.
So does it look like we've pushed it back towards the maybe the end of the year, any rate cuts, or you have no opinion?
I mean, it's so hard to say because this is so volatile. The market is just insane. I don't know if everybody saw what happened over the last 2 days, but we're up almost a half a point from where we were sitting. So we're again above 7%, I mean, it's really difficult. And it's annoying for our area too, because this is our spring market. This is when everybody is out of the woods and trying to purchase a home. And now we're contending again with these interest rates. It's unfortunate.
So what happens, do you tend to lock most of your clients in when they apply, especially in this type of market, or?
Yeah, I definitely err on the side of caution for sure. And I generally lock everybody as soon as I can. And honestly, if the rates start to dip to a point where it makes sense to try to float them down, then I always go back and try to renegotiate that one time for them towards the end of the process. But it's better to lock when you know what's going on than to risk floating them in a market like this.
So I mean, I think when the rates first started to shoot up, I know as a company and as an industry, we actually lost transactions because some of the lenders didn't rate protect their clients. And if they're very close on qualifying, they actually weren't able to close.
Well, if you have somebody that's closing within 60 days, it's really easy to make that determination to lock them. But if you have someone that, has a closing determined based on firmly relocation of the seller, then it's difficult to do that because you really don't know when they're going to close. So floating is the better option there, but then you're leaving yourself open for the risk of increase. So it's difficult. It's a difficult market to determine. You just sort of have to do the best you can, and you have to completely educate the client up front and let them know what's going on.
Gotcha. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think we're going to be in a little bit of a gut check for our clients, both buyers and sellers, and for all the lenders and our finance conversation. I think, when you lock today, it's a heads you win, tails you win future, right?
Correct. And also the DPA programs and the first time homebuyer programs, they're still in the low 6s. So they're still holding on. We're still in the 6s with those programs. So that's helpful.
And the DPAs, are those state grants or?
Yes, those are the state down payment assistance programs, correct. So yesterday they did increase by a quarter, so now we're at 6.5. We were like real steady at 6 for a while, then it creeped up to 6.25, and now we're at 6.5 as of yesterday.
Right. And Fran Blakely, is our new buyer agency agreement live in our New Jersey .loop?
Not yet. I think, because it just came out last week, it takes a few days for .loop to approve the document and for the state to, you know, the state authorizes them to use it, but it's, I'm not sure if it's up yet. I'll check.
Right, so, but we're gonna use it, we just don't have it in our system yet updated, correct?
Say
For New
that,
Jersey? So
I
it's
think so.
allowed to be, it's approved by the state, we can use it, it just is being processed through our .loop for our New
Correct.
Jersey team.
correct.
Okay, so that'll be there shortly, and if you haven't watched the webinar, I think that should be posted up on NJAR, right?
No, it actually came to an email and I emailed it out to all of my agents. I forwarded my email. Everyone in the state gets, they should check their email. They will get a New Jersey weekly newsletter, and in the newsletter is the click to watch the webinar that they held about the buyer's agency agreement.
If Fred, are you on?
Yes.
Can you put that on the hub for us, please? Or at least a link to it on the hub?
I can send it to you, Fred, so you can maybe open it and post a link on the hub.
So what I
Sure.
found interesting about the whole webinar there and the document is the premise of collecting a retainer. And I don't know if Florida has a document that's allowed to be used yet, or even our team in Virginia.
Yeah, we have a document that we can use now, but it's not current.
Okay, because in the document that the New Jersey attorney went over was one where you know, I think he was almost suggesting that, you know, we have a more detailed conversation, appointment at the onset, and we collect a retainer. Okay, which to me seems like a sounder business practice than, you know, we have 100+ people on here. I'm guessing that there are many of us that have run around with buyers only to find out that, you know, maybe they didn't buy, maybe they weren't serious about buying, or maybe they weren't loyal to us and they bought somewhere else without us. That doesn't feel good. It's not a sound business decision. And, you know, even if it was $500 or $1,000 and you refund it back at closing, it's a gut check. You know, it's like if I'm going to sell my car, you know, I collect a $500 deposit before they come back with all the money, because now we have a business arrangement, we have an understanding. So I think that's not a bad idea, and I think it's probably something that many of us will build into our business practice. And if nothing else, we're going to be having these explicit discussions.
Hey, Rob, how would that work with the brokerage in terms of collecting retainers?
So we would put it into an escrow account. We'd have to, you know, create some new accounting procedures for that. And then that money would be turned over to the commission account upon closing. And I guess if it doesn't close, it would be paid out pursuant to the terms of the agreement. And I imagine it would be similar to our Florida staff. You know, Colleen, when transactions fail to close in Florida because the closing date is less forgiving than it is in New Jersey or some other markets, there's often a forfeiture of the deposit, correct?
Yes.
And do most brokerages have a prearranged split for the deposit loss? Because presumably,
in our listing contract, it states that the brokers will receive 50% of the deposit. So then it's divided between the listing broker and the selling broker, but it needs to be checked off in the contract.
and that happens more than you know, a couple of times a year in a brokerage, right? I mean, it's not very
Absolutely.
common, but it does happen more than you'd think.
Yeah, it does.
So I think that would be the principle that we're going to be, you know, playing off of in terms of, you know, if you don't perform, you know, you have something to lose. It's not, you know, no longer are we saying that the service is free, right? And if it's not free, then there should be some financial arrangement, right? Nobody wants to work with a buyer for 3 months and then have them say, you know what, we decided we're just going to continue to rent, right? That's a massive waste of our time. And basically we could have been doing other things with those hours. So anybody from our Virginia Beach team on?
I
Anybody
saw
from-
Carlos.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, who's that?
Justin.
Oh, Justin.
Justin Watson.
So Justin, how does it work if, you know, pre the settlement, if somebody defaults, do deposits regularly get lost?
Obviously, it's a case-by-case basis depending on where we are. But if somebody were to default in the contract, if it's like a loan denial type situation, they're able to receive those escrow funds back.
But if they say, I decided not to, I changed my mind.
And again, depends on where you are. So if you're have an offer that's out there and the other, you know, if the sellers want to hold you to it, they certainly could. They just can't do anything with that property until that escrow money is dispositioned and what's going to happen with it. So if it really plays hardball and the sellers have multiple offers, more often than not, they'll just be like, just take the EMD, let's put it back in the market, and they have people lined up. But if they're a couple of days before closing and they decide to walk away, most likely they're going to lose that EMD.
I think there's a 3-day rescission period here in Florida. I mean, it's not written, but I think that you can, I've had buyers cancel like 24 hours after signing the contract, they just withdrew their offer. Again, the seller can hold it too. Is that right, Colleen? Is that, that's something we have in our contracts? I'm not sure. Trying to remember.
Yeah, that has to do with the mortgage. But if they do not perform, no, if they lose their deposit.
Yeah, I mean, after a certain amount of time. But going back, Rob, when you're saying about buyers having to come up with the retainer, it's going to take a little while, I think, for buyers to actually embrace this new law. It's going to be hard for them to, hard for us to say, well, listen, if you want to work with me, I'll help you. You know, let's do a 30-day contract or a 60-day contract. I need a retainer deposit of $2,000. Buyers are going to be, I think buyers are going to have a lot of pushback on that. That's my feeling.
So I think Ryan, I think change for folks like you and I have been doing it for a very, very long time. It doesn't come easy. And I think it's a credit to you and so many others with experience that we're on this call talking about what the future is going to look like. And you said the word that you think it's going to be hard, and it probably will be hard, but anything that's worth having is usually hard. And I would ask yourself, you know, why would somebody not put up a small deposit? And I'm just going to throw that out to you, Ron. Like, why would somebody hesitate to put up a deposit?
Yeah, well, I just think because it's so new that buyers are not going to get used to it. They're going to say, what do you mean a deposit? We made a list of all our services that we're going to give to the buyer, plus our resumes before we meet with them, so they understand our services, our qualifications, so they'll feel more comfortable, and then actually meet with them to sign the agreement. This agreement could be 1 day, 5 days, 10 days, and it depends on how, you know, what kind of relationship you have with that buyer. But in any case, it's going to be a challenge. But I think that, you know, we're going to probably have to demand some kind of retainer if they want to work with us longer than just a day or 5 days. That's my thoughts.
Can I say something about this?
Sure.
Well, I had a lot of success by not making people sign an agreement from the get-go and making it signed when we want to submit an offer. So a lot of time I suggest putting an offer, even if it's lower than what the seller will accept, especially trying to negotiate, get them a good deal, and then we can sign that agreement then. And it's basically by
Good.
explaining to them that this is the way that I can represent them and get paid. You know, I work with a big company. I work with Remax. We do things by the book, and we have a buyer broker agreement when we send offers. And if people change their mind and they don't want to buy, they want to rent, well, I help them with a rental, and my goal is to, you know, serve them any way I can. And if it's a small transaction, a big transaction, does not matter. I treat them the same, and my networking grows that way, and I get more business and referrals. So it does not, you know, sometimes you want to make a big sale, but it's not in your client's best interest. You need to help them the way they need to be helped, and they will appreciate that and bring you more business. If you tell them, oh, well, you decided to rent and not to buy, so I'm going to keep your retainer. Well, most people, I think they will not appreciate it, even if they pay willingly. Next time they might use someone that's more lenient towards, you know, what they want to do, and someone that's willing maybe to waste some time with them. And then maybe they refer you a brother or aunt or their mother or a friend after all, and you make your money that way. So I personally don't look at how much dollar I make by, you know, with each customer and if it was really worth it or not. I look at the overall picture. I'm in business. I'm making money from referrals that they provide me too. So it does not really matter if I make money on that specific transaction.
So I
But
think
don't you have,
I appreciate you sharing that. I think one of the things that's going to be hard for many of us here is that we need to reimagine what it looks like. We need to reimagine what the space looks like, what providing a service to our clients looks like.
Can I ask
Right?
a question when you get a minute?
Sure, go ahead.
Is there gonna be a set retainer fee or is this up to the individual agent? Are we
So
all gonna be the same across the board,
so
at
this
least
is
for our office?
so this is fresh off the press, so to speak.
Yeah,
You know, my thought is that we would probably, as a company, have a range that we accept.
okay.
You know, and you know, maybe it's $200 to $2,500. I don't know yet. And I think that we need to look at what the standard of practice is. But I would say that you know, if somebody gave us even if it was a $200 deposit, right? And then they were looking to work with us, then they decided that they ghosted us. Anybody have a buyer that ghosted you? Raise your hand, right? Now, if you bought a an electric leaf blower for $200 at Lowe's or Home Depot, it didn't work, you'd go back and get your money, right? If you put up a $200 retainer and then you ghosted your agent, then you started to buy again, you might say, hey, I'm going to find Kelly Dunn because when I buy, I'm going to get that $200 or $1,000 back towards my purchase price. That might actually be a really good thing, right? Is that an interesting way of reimagining how the consumer mind works?
How does this all play into, you know, how there's that whole clause during attorney review before it's under, you know, under contract that anyone can walk away, no harm, no foul. Now there is.
So it's
Okay.
important to have a distinction between, you know, this is a like a contract when you sign at the car dealer to fix your car. Okay, you sign that contract, they fix your car. You can't say I have a 3-day attorney review period. That is a unique provision in New Jersey for realtors being allowed to prepare contracts from opinion 26. In Florida, Ron, you don't have a review period. Your contract is hard when you sign it, both sides, correct? Or Colleen?
yeah, there are
Correct.
some loopholes. There are some loopholes, but yes, once you sign the contract, you're bound to it. However, there's the inspection clause that you can get out of, appraisal clause you can get out of. They, you know, if they can't get
Right,
a mortgage.
but some of those are more manipulative as opposed to a legal remedy, right? That's a little bit playing the back door than playing it straight up.
Right,
So Kelly, but
Yes.
playing it straight up in collecting a retainer would all be about, having clarity, right? Explaining to the customer how it works and saying, look, I'm gonna work for you if, you don't complete a transaction, that this money is a fee for service. And, if you do buy in the future, if you fail to buy now, my personal policy is I'll provide that credit back to you 6 months or a year from now if you come back to me. And I think that's a good business for us, because then the clients will be looking for us. But let me find Kelly's contact info, because she has $200 or 1,000 of my dollars.
yeah, but will we be able to hold that $1,000 that long? 'Cause
Well,
we
I
have
think,
to-
well, I think what would happen there, Ron, is, Kelly would say, hey, the clients disappeared or the contract ended, right? It was a 6-month contract or a 90-day buyer agency agreement. The client didn't buy, I keep the $1,000. But we might have a policy, whereas if that client comes back to us, right, we'll re-sign that contract. We'll say already paid, if that's something that you as a independent contractor elect to do. Then you can say, when it closes, I'll give you a credit on the commission, which means if the commission's 15,000, you only get paid 14 because you were paid 1,000 upfront. Make sense?
Yep,
So anyway, that's my thoughts on that. So I think that this is, potentially a really good thing. I do have experience with an agent in our organization that put something on with no compensation and told the any offers they need to represent that they have a executed buyer agency agreement and they will be compensated by their buyer. Was a little bit of pushback, but it seemed to roll out fairly well. I had a lengthy conversation with the agent before the call. I don't know if that's going to be. I don't know how substantial that's going to be with putting out zero compensation. It may be, it may be market driven. It may be a way for brokers and brokerages to kind of have more or less a pocket listing inventory. That remains to be seen. But what I want to focus talking on today is the new seller conversation, right? And I want to give you the language. I want to give you the confidence. And I also want to give you the theory behind how we move forward, how we have conversations with our sellers. You're all, almost every one of you here is experienced, successful. You've been proven at what you do. And I think it's a testament to your mindset that you're here trying to learn even before it's quote unquote mandatory or even officially approved by the courts. So let's go back to, what's good for the seller. Okay. Because I think, in reality, it's easier to sell if we have a superior product. Would you all agree with that? Like it's hard to sell something that's completely self-serving and not in the best interest of the client. Some of us on this Zoom meeting might be able to pull that off, but many of us, we might not be, our true, authentic, genuine self when we're doing something that might not be consistent with our interest and the seller's interest. So if we were to look at it and let's assume that we need to be prepared for challenging questions. We need to be prepared for pushback, right? We're not always going to get pushback, but if we're not prepared for pushback, I think sometimes people might feel more emboldened to ask us questions that we're not prepared to answer. So with that said, my personal beliefs on taking care of the client is that if we decouple the commission completely or the compensation completely, that in certain fringe areas, for sure, we are going to limit the amount of qualified buyers able to purchase. So in other words, if we have a property, the one that I was talking about had 5 offers on it. So if we have a scenario where we decouple the commission completely, or presumably, I can't imagine a scenario where we're gonna get more activity if we're not compensating a buyer broker or offering a sales concession. Would you grant me that, Ron?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then that takes us to, in a normal market, I think houses take what, 45 to 70 days to sell with a balanced market. I think these are some of the NAR stats.
Yeah, that's the norm in a normal market.
Yep. So if we have more qualified buyers looking at the property, and presumably we have more qualified offers coming in, let's say if there's the difference between one offer and two offers in a normal market is the difference between, a bidding war and acceptance of whatever a buyer is willing to pay, right? Because sometimes if you say, I am going to counter your offer 20,000 more, if the buyer feels empowered, they're just going to walk, right? If you go back to a balanced market, countering back a buyer often gets crickets. But if you have multiple buyers because you positioned it correctly, you will then be empowered to call highest and best and, take care of what your seller's interests are. So I believe that, for our seller's benefit, it's going to be better off to provide either a concession that can be used towards the buyer's broker fee, or a concession that can be used to assist the buyer in closing if they're not inclined to work with the client. And that would be how my discussions would be when I'm talking to sellers. And it would be whether or not they bring up the headline news or bring up the option. I personally think that I would say to you, hey, Ron, you're not obligated to pay a buyer's agent. You were not obligated before, but I want to talk to you about the benefits. I want to ask you a few questions. And those few questions would be, Ron, if we put your house on the market and, we were able to get 30% more showings, what do you think that would do to the sale price? We were to have 25% more qualified buyers, what do you think that would do to your sales price? And
yeah,
it's going to go up, right?
sure.
And, I'm not sure of how it lands afterwards, but I know everybody on this call, if we had a buyer that signed a buyer agency agreement and the buyer went to us and said, will you help me collect a commission on this in the way we make our offer? We're going to fight like hell to get them a concession to pay that commission so it doesn't come out of their pocket, right?
Yeah, you'll have to explain that to the buyer, because when they're saying, well, the seller's giving me a concession towards closing costs, why should I give it to you? There's going to be pushback, I think, there. So whenever you get the concession, and it has to be spelled out in that agreement with the buyer, that the seller's concession doesn't mean that you're going to get 2%, 3%, whatever it is. It means it's going to be part of our commission. If it's 2.5% that we agree on, and we get 3%, then I'll give you that 0.5% towards your closing costs. I talked to a mortgage broker about this the other day to see how viable it would be for a mortgage broker to have that in the contract or in the agreement. And they said it depends on how it's written in the contract.
I think, I think when Florida finalizes their agreement, that will be specified.
Okay, yeah, so I think, state law will certainly play a big role in, how we remain compliant. But I just want to put out there that, there's knowing there's understanding, and then there's the level of understanding it so well that you can teach it, right? So there's 3 different levels of understanding. And if you understand it at the 3rd level, right, you want to educate your client on the benefits of how the new paradigm or the new rules work for them. Okay, it's not like you want to be, if you know about it, you might be able to fight your way through some objections. Okay, if you really understand it, it might be a little bit easier. But if you're able to teach it and it's really, you're totally immersed in it, you welcome that question, you welcome that objection because you know how to handle it. And as a matter of fact, if you're really in that immersion stage where you understand it so well, you might bring it up and say, hey, Ron, you've sold houses before, now it's more common where a seller has the option not to pay, but I want to educate you on what that means, right? And, if you ask them the question, say, hey, if we have less buyers, if we have less activity, we have less competition, what do you think that's going to do to the price? I think that we can draw most people to the conclusion that I personally believe in.
I agree.
Okay. All right. And then, there have been some dialogues and narratives. I think I heard Daryl Davis talk about it, about, what type of work do you do? Oh, I'm a nurse. Okay. Do you work for free? Oh, okay, great. You know what I mean? Like, so you have that in your arsenal without being snarky about it. But everybody who's buying a house, they need something called income, right? Or they need a job to be able to qualify. And that's a consistent income based upon, hey, I show up to work, I, nurse patients, I get paid. I show up to work, I do tax returns, I get paid. I show up to work, I, cook food, I get paid. So I think people understand that, we're not a charity, right? And I think people understand at the core that there's a distinction between a professional, right, and a licensee. And I think it's beholden to us to be able to identify those differences to buyers and sellers, because it's the opposite side of the same coin. So when we look at these meetings with our sellers and they say, hey, what if I don't want to pay a commission? Yeah, you don't have to pay one, but let's talk about what that would mean, right? And I think if we do something where there's no compensation, like if you do have somebody who wants to go in that direction, right? And you say, hey, it doesn't really impact me because I'm still getting my commission, right? I'm getting my 3%, 2.5%, 4%, whatever it is. What does the conversation look like if you have that property marketed and a buyer comes unrepresented? Who's going to do most of the work there? We are, right?
Of course.
So we need to, be practical and look at those circumstances. And, sometimes it's more difficult working through an intermediary or another broker, right? Because you're not getting the straight story. But how many times have you worked with an excellent broker on the other side or an excellent agent, and they've helped pull together the miracle of the century? Have any of you closed deals like that?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Right. And that those excellent brokers are worth every penny they get paid, right? Because they're able to get their client to do all the activities that need to get done to get this to close, right? Or maybe to accept some flaws in the transaction, right? Oh, we can't put a new whatever in, the sellers don't have the money, or the sellers don't have the appetite to do that. So we all need to figure out a workaround to get it closed. Having somebody on the other side that is competent is truly a benefit to us. It's not, it's not a drawback. Those that are, I'm sure probably equal number of hands would be raised with agents that they work with that have basically done everything possible to kill a deal, right? We've seen those too.
Yeah. I don't think it's gonna be too difficult to persuade the sellers that they have to pay they have to compensate the buyer's brokers. Because as you were pointing out, we need the extra help to get better pricing, to get a better price for them, to get better terms for them. And if their neighbor down the street they're gonna give compensation to the buyer's agent and we're not, guess whose house is gonna sell before yours? So there's ways to really persuade the sellers. And I think, it's like you said, it's just educating them and having a good conversation with them and bringing out the facts.
Does anyone want to kind of take the other side to Ron's point and say, hey, I think I think sellers are going to resist and give us a reasonable argument as to why.
I have a question. So who's stopping us from making a deal with the seller saying, I'll take 3% and then secretly giving 1% of it to the buyer's agent?
I mean, 1% of your 3?
Right. Let's just say, or.
Right, but I think you need to disclose how you're going to be sharing that compensation. So you can't.
You're not allowed?
Well, you can't, put in the contract saying I'm getting paid 3 and I'm putting out 0 and then put 1 out and accept 2. I don't know that there would be any, I don't know how that would be, like, who would be aggrieved by doing that other than you. But I don't think that's a transparent way of discussing it. And I would.
Okay, then what if I said, okay, and it'll come out of my pocket?
You can't do that. It's against the law. That's what the law is changing. You can't give a commission to someone else, even though it's not on the MLS. How are you gonna? It has to come from the seller. It has to come from the seller's request that they pay compensation to the buyer, and that compensation, part of that compensation goes to the buyer's agent. I don't think it can come from us, right, Rob?
So,
You can't.
so Ron, I think if you put it out with 0 and somebody knocks on your door and says, I have a buyer, I want to get 1%, then it would be beholden to us to go back to the seller and say, I'm willing to kick in 1% to help make this happen, is a scenario that I think is completely compliant. I think if you, I think most people would do it the other way, is they would, take 6 or 5 and, only put out 1 without sharing it with the seller, and the seller is thinking it's an even split. But I don't think you'd want to have that as a business practice. And I think if it were a practical way of negotiating a contract, then you'd have to go to your client and say, I'm going to contribute 1 of the 3% you're giving to me to the buyer's agent.
And that you're allowed to do?
With disclosure. But the
Hey,
best
Rob,
practice, the best practice, Glenn, 1 second, but I think the best practice, Amy, is to just have full transparency. Go ahead, Glenn.
So just a couple of comments on both sides of this. So I think first is we kind of go right to the path of it's not going to be available, and it has been available in a bunch of states, and they've done this for a very, very long time, right? So some of us might not have. It's just a new skill that's necessary for us to do, right? I have 2 examples that I think are really relevant. So one was the charging into the storm, as Tom Toole said. We had a buyer, all of our buyer's agents were on a call, and a lender asked each and every one of them individually, what do you think about it, and are you concerned? And every single one of them said, no, we're not concerned. We have the skills, and we're going to be able to have the conversation. And I'm already having the conversation. I think that's the piece that I'm frustrated with in this whole thing is everyone's throwing up going, we don't have the final judgment, but we know what the tools will be at our disposal. Maybe the final configuration isn't there. And if we can't say that with great confidence as professionals, then there's something really wrong, right? And maybe the skill is the problem, or that person's the problem as to why this lawsuit happened in the first place, right? And then I think on the sell side, 3 listing appointments this week, all 3, I've brought the topic up to have the discussion. I said, I know there's a lot of news out there. Do you have questions? And let me explain. One of them was an attorney. At the end of it, he said, I'm absolutely putting compensation out in whatever form it is, right? So I think it's a matter of having enough confidence and not hedging, waiting for the DOJ and the July 15th date. We have to be there and be proud, be informed, and be willing to talk about it and excited to talk about it because, boy, we're going to finally be treated like the professionals we are.
That's it. We need to educate the public.
Well said, Glenn, absolutely.
So what I take away from that, Glenn, is it's not you, it's me. Okay, so it's not you, it's me. Like, so if we're getting resistance, maybe it's not them, maybe it's us.
Yes, exactly my point. Yes, that was a great observation, Rob. That's what I meant. My underlying message.
Yes, you know, and I think this is where I've been nibbling around the edges here, Glenn, for a while, which is the outcome is not dependent upon the client. It's dependent upon the conversation and the value proposition that we put forth that determines the outcome. So in other words, if Glenn Baker trains his team and 95% of the time, or let's just say 90% of the time, you know, they have compliance with, you know, the process that they believe in. And maybe 5% of the time, the consumer is saying, hey, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I don't buy it. And then there's going to be at least an equal amount of times when Glenn and his team are going to say, you know what, we're probably not a good fit for you. Right? Because
100%.
Because that's the power of abundance, right, Glenn? Is when you can go and say, you know what, I just share with you how we work. You know, if that's not how you want to operate, you know, there's a lot of different options that you have. I wish you well, and you know, move on, right?
Yep.
And if you were to give me a gut on if there are, you know, a percentage that you don't work with, let's just say it's 10% of the people that you either choose not to work with or they choose not to work with you or your team. What percentage of that, Glenn, is us saying we don't want to work with them versus them saying that I'm not going to sign an agreement and give you 2.5%, 3%? What's your gut on that?
It's extraordinarily low because they have to go somewhere. And I look at it like if I'm not the one helping them, they're going to be underserved. So I'm coming in with that perspective, right?
So,
I agree with you, Glenn. I think that if we're confident, and when you tell them you may not be a good fit, because I've actually seen it happen, they want you more. And they realize that what you're telling them is important if you're willing to walk away.
Yeah, they'll think twice. Well, they're going to walk away from this thing. Yeah, I agree.
Rob,
yeah,
it's Audrey. Can I point out something to everybody?
And then we'll get to you next, Dan. Okay, go ahead, Audrey.
I want everybody, especially in New Jersey, to realize, based on what I listened to, that New Jersey is going to make this buyer agreement thing something that we must do. So whether we like it or not, and I think it's a great thing, it's something that is new, and we just have to get into the habit of understanding this and know how to present it to people. It makes us more professional, and it's something that I've wanted for a long time. So I'm happy about it, and we just need to be trained and figure out how we do our business. That's all. But New Jersey is gonna have it as law.
Yep. Audrey, thanks for sharing. Dan, you had a comment?
Yeah, this is kind of a question / scenario situation. So currently on Zillow and many other websites syndicated, they're selling zip codes to real estate agents to get buyers leads. Now, if they change the rule and don't allow compensation to the buyer's agent, are they going to allow the listing agent's contact information now to be on that listing and those syndicated websites for people to contact directly? That's going to change the whole ball game on that side too.
The listing agent's contact information is already on Zillow. It's just you have to scroll down. Whoever feeds the listing to Zillow, if you scroll down, it does indicate who the listing agent is.
But
For the ID,
with their direct contact information.
Right, but okay, so Dan, let me just
Why would they sell zip codes then? Yeah.
all right, let me unwrap that for you. From my opinion. if you get a lead on Zillow, right, there will be some that will reject you if you're not the listing agent, okay? They'll be like, oh, I want to talk to the listing agent only. There are some, when they realize that they're gonna have to sign a buyer's agency agreement, they might just say, no, I just want to contact the listing agent. I don't know where that magnitude is, but I think the benefit or the value is that everybody has the same playing field as us. So, you know, if they meet with the listing agent can say, hey, you know, I'm going on a presumption that there's an agreement in all the states that we operate where they can have a buyer's agency agreement for one day for one property, right? And then they move on to another buyer's agent or another listing agent.
Or the listing agent can adopt them as their buyer. Say, if you don't like this house, I can show you something else.
Correct. So the listing agent can get them to sign they can use that as the opportunity to sign the prospect for a buyer's agency agreement. But the converse to that also is, Dan, is that, you know, the ones that you do get, if you're paying for zip codes, right? And if people are trained to go directly to the listing agent, then those aren't even calls that come to you, because after the customer makes that mistake once, they'll figure it out and they won't keep going through Zillow. Do you follow?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm a buyer and I'm familiar with the new law, I don't want to pay a buyer's agent commission. Why wouldn't I contact the listing agent directly and work it out with him or her?
So Dan, then like here's where the mindset needs to shift a little bit. Is would you want to hire the attorney that's suing you for, you know, somebody tripping on your front step? Would you want to hire that same firm to defend you? I mean, I'm assuming the answer is no, right?
No.
But when you're when you're going through the listing agent, right, you're not getting independent representation, right? You know, Florida does not have dual agency. So how is Ron, how is a buyer treated in that case? Is just a client, as a customer, not a client? Ron Piccolo, can you define that in Florida? Huh?
Would be a customer. It would be my client. Yeah, it would be both.
Right, but where's the duty of loyalty in the state of Florida in that scenario? And I don't mean to be going down a rabbit hole
It's
here.
okay. In Florida, the duty is to the transaction.
Exactly.
We're transactional brokers.
Right.
So we're sort of split evenly between buyer and seller. We're there to make it happen.
Right.
But Colleen, so if I represent the buyer on Dan's listing, right? Do I have a different? Obviously I have a different duty to my client than I do to Dan's seller, correct?
Yes, we could. Well, in Florida, we can transition into single agency. So if we're a single agent representing the buyer, then our interest would be with our buyer, of course.
So with the buyer agency agreement, right? If that in effect happens in Florida, then we're not a transaction broker with the buyer, correct?
Yeah.
No, we still are. The transaction, the buyer brokerage agreement states that we are brokers for the transaction. So, I mean, it's still going to have to be worked out here. I think, you know, we probably will see us going back to some form of agency, but I'm not sure.
I think that, honestly, I think what it will happen is that if a buyer came to my listing and said, you know, we'd like to see your listing today, I would have to sign a buyer's broker's agreement, correct? With that buyer in order to show him that property. And if they wanted to put an offer on it, you would have to disclose to the seller and to the buyer that I'm working as for the transaction. So my best interest is for both, to put everything together.
Yes.
So you can't separate the two.
But if I come to you, Ron, and you're selling a Keller Williams listing, right? And I say, Ron, can you help me try to figure out what's the best price I can get? I mean, you're going to try to figure out for me, I would presume, how to get me the best deal, help me negotiate it, right? As opposed to just try to push the transaction through at some level, whether it's, you know, a legal duty or whether it's part of the services that you provide. So I think the language in Florida is going to, you know, the conversation to be compliant is going to be addressed once Florida figures out exactly how these agreements look like. But, you know, Dan, if there were only one agent on a transaction, one of three things is going to happen. Okay. The deal is going to die because the unrepresented party is not doing what they're supposed to do, right? You're going to do the work of the other person and not get paid, or by the grace of the real estate gods, the unrepresented party is going to figure it out and get it to close, right? But there's a lot of things and a lot of collaboration that happens for a difficult transaction to come together, right? And
True.
we've had transactions where we worked with, you know, competent counterparties who help us get this transaction done for the interest of both parties.
Correct.
All right.
Rob,
So,
I think the biggest challenge we're going to have is with that first-time home buyer. You presenting this document, which is very lengthy, and you know, for most of them, probably not even going to understand that. To say, okay, you're going to have to sign up with me. You're going to have to pay me. When they feel that they can just go to Zillow, they can go to Realtor.com and find their home. Granted, they don't understand down the road how that may not benefit them, but initially, that's the thought process. And I think it's going to be hard to get them to sign off and to give you a retainer.
so Mickey, you know, I'm a big fan of you and your business. I think that we need to think a little bit differently. Okay, because everybody's going to have that same 5-page document. So the first-time home buyer is going to have to deal with it, right? And then it becomes, you know, how can we demonstrate the value that we have? Now, Justin, are you somewhere where you can talk? Justin Watson?
Yes, yeah.
All right, sorry to voluntold you, but
You're fine.
Can you just share with the group what video you posted, basically what that was?
Yeah, I mean, basically it was just outlining a way to kind of stand out, talking about the percentages, what I was able to save my clients over the last 3 transactions. I went back and looked at what was the average I was able to save my clients versus, you know, with concessions, list price, and between those 3 transactions, it was just under 30,000. And so threw a quick little video out, 20-30-second video out, just to kind of outline this was the savings that I was able to get for my buyers, and that come mid-July, there might be a situation where that might fall on the commission might be falling into their laps to have to pay. So between now and July is a great opportunity for them to get involved, try to get some savings before they might be the ones that are taking on that burden, essentially.
So you had like 3 things that you addressed. One was that, you know, you looked at the market. Actually, we looked at it together, and, you know, the areas that you sold, you were negotiating 2.5% better than the average sale price in that market. So it was that was the 29,000 and change that you saved your clients based upon that parameter. And then one client, you were even able to negotiate in for the seller to pay $7,500 of their closing costs. So the discussion was, hey, you know, I'm wanted to share with my, my audience that, you know, my last 3 transactions, I saved an average of $9,723 off of the purchase price. And on one of them, I was even able to get the seller to pay $7,500 towards the buyer's closing costs, saving my client $7,500 out of pocket. And, you know, there's changes coming down the pike that after July 15th, you know, buyers might be expected to pay part of that commission if you're interested in buying between now and the end of the year, please reach out to me and here's my number. So you basically had 3 points that you hit in 20 seconds. And I think you identified the value, right?
Yeah,
And you-
absolutely.
And you found a way to weave in the fact that on the 20th, that when this becomes effective, that it might be more prevalent. So let's have that discussion now. So I think these are the things that we need to be comfortable having those conversations with. And, Mickey, everybody's got the same playing field as us. And to the extent that we can not only do an excellent job, but we can articulate how we provide our services and what value that provides. I mean, I really look at it as an opportunity. And I think, Audrey, you look at it as an opportunity more than a negative, correct?
Yes, I do.
And Mickey, it's having the roadmap to conduct those conversations for those first-time home buyers, because first-time home buyers need us more than repeat buyers, in my opinion, right, Mickey? Mickey.
I was muted.
Yeah.
I just think it's going to be difficult. I'm not one on the negative. My glass is always half full. However, I do think it's going to be a challenge to get, especially the first-time home buyers, to sign off on that buyer's agreement, to want to give you a retainer, to want to pay up front. And in some cases, they don't even have the money. They're barely scraping with that 5% down or 10% down. And truthfully, I don't get how you can figure out how you've saved your client money in today's market when everything sells over list price. So how am I going to calculate how I've saved my client money in a transaction?
Well, I mean, if in your market, everybody pays over ask, but your clients paid 2.5% over ask when the market's averaging 4% over ask, you might have saved your client 1.5%. And I don't know that it's strictly about, just that Justin saved $9,000 for his client. I think it's about, how you make the customer feel, how you make the buyer feel. I think it's do you feel you're overpaid when you represent a first-time home buyer who's struggling for money? I know the answer, Mickey, but just humor me.
No, I don't. But I've also helped people without even getting paid. It's about helping the client. It's not always about the money.
Mickey, I think your value is in your concern and your ability to negotiate and to help and look out for the best interest of your client. And I think that's what the agreement's going to be about.
I do that, but
money.
The problem is when we're required now to get them to sign this buyer's agreement on your first or second meeting. They don't know me yet. My clients love me. I have tons of referrals. I hate to sound like but I have a lot of referrals from clients that I've helped. Some of them have become friends. So I don't have a problem articulating my worth once they get to know me. It's just that initial beginning. Like you just meet with somebody, they don't really know you. My clients don't know me until at least the second, third, or the fourth time that we meet and we work together.
So Mickey, perhaps, there's a path where, our agreement or maybe your agreement is, hey, you know what? I collect $1,000. I know it's a lot. If you decide that you don't like me in the first week, I'll give you the $1,000 back. Okay. So that you have instead of it's a problem, it's an opportunity to reimagine how it looks like. Right. And, there's no, like a home inspector is not going to, give you your money back if the deal doesn't come together. An attorney is not going to give the money back. A surgeon's not going to give their money back. So I think, we need to look at ourselves more like a profession. We need to feel, I want to use this correctly. We want to be not influenced by what we fear others will do out of desperation. I think I nailed that. Right. We don't want to make our decisions to mirror others who are making desperate decisions. Karma, go ahead.
All right, so, and I'm very excited about the new, and I agree that it will take time until the buyer has no choice except if they want to buy a house, this is what it is. But when I go for a listing, these people, they met me for the first time and I get the listing. It's the same idea when you meet with the people and you share with them their actually your credential, how you're going to help them, how you're going to, in the meantime, and also you can give them, if they are not happy with your service, they can cancel the contract. I have one more to ask. Now, for the seller compensation, can we write this in a multiple listing that the seller agree to buyer compensation for that much or no? Thank you.
No.
It can be written in the MLS that the seller can give the buyer a compensation. You can put that in the remarks, but you can't show it's to the buyer's broker. Going back to what Colleen said, and to Mickey, is basically you have to show value to your client. And if you sign a 1 week agreement with $1,000 retainer and say, if we can work together and you like what I do for you, then we'll continue. If not, then I will give you the $1,000 back at the end of the fifth day or whatever it is. I think that's a good proposition for the buyer, and they'll feel more comfortable. Because I know, even like Mickey, you said you work with buyers and they love you. And it's the same thing with us. When we work with buyers, they really appreciate our time and our efforts, and we return phone calls. So these are the things that, you're going to provide to that buyer. They're going to feel pretty comfortable working with you. Now, you're going to get a couple of buyers here and there that are not going to feel comfortable with you, and they'll probably say, no, we want $1,000 back and we're moving on. So be it. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, so go ahead, Michelle.
To add to that, my New York side, they're already exercising not disclosing the compensation. So they're already started over there, and I asked the realtor how come they started, and they say it's optional. So some realtors are already started exercising, some are waiting in July. To answer to Mickey, I think when I deal with first-time home buyers, they don't know absolutely anything. So I don't get a negative feedback when I explain this to them because I already started. However, buyers that already know or repeat, they stopped last year and they come back, they already know how the game goes. They're the ones that are pushing back, and they have asked me, well, come to July, if we don't find something, what do I do? Are you still going to work with me, or do I have to go to the seller's agent? So I told her, I'm like, I will have to charge you for my compensation, or, if the seller's not willing to pay. So I had to have that difficult conversation already on my New York side.
That's a good thing.
So, and there's a lot of comments going through.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely, go ahead.
If say you're at the offer stage, right? And you're making offers and you approach a listing that isn't giving out compensation to buyers, but you put together a very good offer that perhaps has the best terms, maybe it's the best price. And as part of that offer, you and the buyer agree, we're going to propose to the seller that they have to pay my fee. That sounds like it could be a way to inflate the price. The buyer gets to borrow that money, and then everybody wins. Is that legal? Does that sound like a good idea? What are our thoughts there?
Ryan, it's a negotiation. It sounds like it's in everybody's best interest, and it would be legal. Okay. The only thing that is not legal, if everything goes through, is that you put out, I'm giving a 2.5% sales concession, and that must be used to pay the buyer broker. That would not be compliant. But there's a lot of creativity that can serve clients, in my opinion, and that's one of them that you just suggested.
Great, thank you.
Rob,
You can also send your offer.
Sorry,
Sorry.
hi. No, I'm sorry, it's Stacy from New Jersey. I have a question going back to the listing presentation. In Jersey, I don't know what it's like other places, but dual agency, because people are, I know it's not till June, but people are, bringing it up now. So how do we have that discussion? Because we can't get paid by both sides. And, somebody in the office as well, say Karma shows one of my listings and she has a buyer's agency agreement in effect, but we know that on the closing statement, we can't collect a fee from both the buyer and the seller for a dual.
So
how do
Stacy,
we handle that now?
Stacy, it could be done a couple of ways. I'm not sure if one way would be frowned upon versus another. But let's just say, for example, if you're working with the seller, right, and you say we're not putting out compensation, right? And you could list it for 6%, right? And then say if there's another agent involved, if I'm not involved with the buyer, then it goes down to 3. And if I am involved representing the buyer, then the seller pays the full 6%. That would be one obvious solution. Another obvious solution would be is if arises where you're saying the buyer has to pay the commission, then you represent the buyer. Before you submit that to the seller, you say, hey, we're going to need to increase the price so that the buyer is going to increase the price to pay you more so that you can pay me the commission. So I think those are 2 ways that you could handle that specific New Jersey challenge that you had mentioned. Does that make sense, Stacy?
Yeah, I mean, it stinks, but
Why does it stink?
I'm just the whole thing. I mean, it worked so well the way it was. It was so fair to everybody, and I don't know why people who aren't in the industry are getting it. But that's a different discussion altogether. So that scenario, the second scenario, is that's a sort of preemptive discussion we should have with the seller at the time of signing, going over certain scenarios that may happen, or just let it lie until I bring my own buyer.
So for the next 30 days, I probably wouldn't change the dialogue until we see how this all rolls out. But I think that there's, several ways to resolve that issue, and especially in New Jersey where, Stacey, most of your deals, even in Mercer and Burlington County, have attorneys, or are there a fair amount that are title companies?
It's 50-50 Mercer, almost all, Burlington, almost none.
Okay, so maybe in those scenarios there, you just need to have a attorney on one side that can make those changes to be compliant. Those are just a couple of different scenarios, Stacey. I think, the state's probably going to work it out. Fran Blakely, are you still with us, right?
Yeah, you think they'll change it so we can get compensated by both sides in this situation?
Yeah, Fran Blakely, if you can't talk, I think the state's going to have to make an adjustment to put us in compliant position to serve the customer, right? So right now, our law that we have is kind of archaic, and it was designed like that for, purely for agency reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So Stacey, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. I would say for the next 30 days, don't worry about that. And then as we get more direction, I will backfeed that to you. There have been some comments about, this is a little bit frustrating because we're sharing like 3 states and how they operate. But I intentionally did it this way because we might be able to get insight from how other states with different rules, plan to adapt to these changes. And maybe some of those rules might actually be, more applicable to our state. So, in case of Florida, it's possible that Florida might wind up becoming, instead of a transaction broker, to agency again. How long ago was agency there, Colleen? Like 20 years, 25?
Yes, about that.
So it's possible that the laws locally might have to shift. And you know what, Ron, and everybody else in Florida, you're going to say the system worked. Why the hell are they changing it? Instead of thinking like that, think about the sooner I adapt, the more I'm going to be attractive and better able to serve my clients, because I'm not, cussing the fact that the system changed. I'm embracing it, and I'm getting that message to the clients. I'm gonna go another 6 minutes here. I know we're a little bit over, but it seems like a really, really robust topic. And Stacy, I hope that helps you a little bit. Brian, you had an
Yes, thank
excellent,
you.
you had an excellent comment. You know, Dan, and Mickey, you know, if you can articulate, I know you both very well. If you both can articulate what you do and spend a little bit more time on figuring out how to get that to flow easily and feel comfortable, it's going to be a huge benefit for us because everybody has to play by the same rules.
Hey, Rob, can you go over number 21 lien a little bit? I'm looking at the agreement again.
Okay, so 21 says that if you don't pay us the commission, it can now be a lien on the property. Okay, whereas before in New Jersey, they didn't want a commission to be a lien on the property. That's a great thing, Robert.
Yeah, but I get. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. How can they not pay us commission? Because at closing, wouldn't hold up the close if all of a sudden they're holding money back. I had a situation like that this year where we almost didn't close, but it was on the seller's side.
Okay, so to be clear on the technical aspects of that, not paying a commission, I think could always have converted to a lien. It wasn't by definition going to be a lien. So now if a party closes knowing that there's a commission due, then there would be a title issue and the title company will now be your biggest collection agent.
Hey, Rob.
Yes, sir.
So we have our attorney review clause. And I know we have the 118 on the first page, but in New Jersey, when the attorneys automatically disapprove our contract and then expand, and they actually put that in the attorney review rider, which is signed both by all parties that are involved in the transaction. So like, how are we, like, as agents supposed to protect ourselves if the attorneys are automatically scratching that out?
That
Right.
was discussed
Well-
on the meeting, Rob. That was discussed by the attorney that was explaining the contract.
Right, so basically, Carlos, they can't do that because the contract allowing the lien to be placed is between us and the buyer, right? And then the buyer at that point becomes owner of the property, and that lien is there's an express consent to that lien if we weren't paid. So an attorney cannot change a contract that the buyer and us are only privy to. It's a big deal. It's a big benefit for us. And Audrey, I give you points to pick on that. So there's another thing that's positive for the industry. And the other, any last question or two before we wrap up? And I want everybody to leave here on a positive note, and I will be available, you know, if we need to do coaching, if we need to do sessions on how we can, you know, set ourselves apart from, no, so that clause can't get canceled in attorney review.
Rob,
You can message me directly if you have some evidence elsewhere.
Rob,
But yes, Audrey.
can I make a suggestion? I think that we need to have like in-person discussions about this so everyone's on the same page as an office. I really do think that we need to sit down and go through this thing so everybody understands what this is about and where we go from here. Because as I said before, New Jersey, they're saying New Jersey is going to make this buyer contract a thing. And we really need to know as an office how we're going to approach this. So I think we need to sit down and have in-person discussions about how we're doing this and how the office is going to expect us to do things and how the mortgage people are going to play a part in some of the scenarios that are going to come up as well.
So what I'm going to do for you, Audrey, is from the procedural standpoint, and I'll make sure we're compliant state by state, is come up with a policy, and that policy might be that, you know, our company policies would collect $200 to $2,500. I'm going to talk with our leadership team to figure out what's the best practice. And you might be able to write into that contract, hey, if you're, this is fully refundable in the first 7 days if you're not satisfied. And I actually like that provision because you know what? I don't want to work with somebody who's not satisfied with what I'm doing. And our goal is not to rip somebody off for $400 or $2,500. I think we're all on that same page, right? We're not looking to make the retainer. We're looking to transact a closing, right? We're looking to get somebody into a house, right? So if they have a week to get to know us, and that's something that doesn't violate anything in the spirit of the agreement, then that might be something that we empower you to say, hey, Francis Landon, we can give you a week to see if you like working with me. And if you don't, you just send me an email and then we give you your money back.
I think that could be a good idea, Rob, but 1 week may not be enough. That's typically maybe one meeting. In the very first meeting, I don't know that can, express all the value and everything. I think a month is more like it. Like they have to, often there's not enough inventory. You may just show one home. And you might have to be out there, 2 or 3 times in order for them to really have a sense of what you do and who you are and all that.
So Mickey, that might be something that we give you guidance on and you make your own business decision how you want to handle that. I think, showing the showing of houses is secondary to the business relationship, right? And instead of, showing houses, I'm going to steal another Tom Toolism of running into the storm. And I'm sure he probably stole most of this from somebody else anyway, but instead of saying we're going to have a buyer's consult, why don't we have a buyer's strategy session, right? About what's the way that we're going to go through, getting you the best possible outcome in the market we're in. So if it becomes a buyer's market, we have a strategy on how to, negotiate 2 or 3 properties and see who's most desperate. If we're in the seller's market like we are now, we talk about how do we wind up being the winning individual in that process, right? And that's what that strategy session's about. And I think it's less relevant whether you show them 1 house or 11 houses, right? And that's something that we need to get our arms around. We need to get comfortable with, and that needs to be the standard because this process has to go through both seller markets now that are very tight and buyer markets, right? And the process for both are slightly different. So that's why maybe we call it a strategy session. Do you like the term strategy session, buyer strategy session?
I like that a lot.
So who's going to hold the buyer's retainer? That would Rosa. That's Rosa in Florida. That's something that we need to figure out. In New Jersey, it would be held by the broker's trust account, almost for certain. And that's going to be a lot of extra paperwork. And we want to be, our job from a compliance standpoint is to protect you. Okay, and that just means that we need to make sure that all of our I's are dotted, our T's are crossed, so that, if there's a dissatisfied customer, unreasonable customer, that we have our back end covered. Leo Arias, are you on, Leo?
Rob, in Florida, it'd have to be a separate escrow account.
Right, so that's why I said Florida's going to be, and we don't even know. Do we know, Colleen, if the Florida agreement is likely to include a option for a buyer deposit, or if that's something that's not going to be in the standard?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so some of these things some of these things will take a little bit of time to work out, and if this is working out great in New Jersey and it's not part of Florida's standard agreement, maybe we can, be a leader in the industry and say, we're going to empower our agents to have that option and the process, Colleen, to hold it.
Can't the title company hold it? Iconic Title, our title here?
So, Ron, I'm thinking that because that's a commission and that would be applied back at closing, maybe that can go into the commission account. Because in essence, it's a commission, right? But
Florida, it's complicated. In Florida, you can take a retainer, but it does have to be in a totally separate account. It has to be an account for retainers.
All right, but maybe it's called something different, Colleen. And I agree,
Right,
with
it
you,
is.
compliance is tricky, but maybe it's a prepaid commission instead of a retainer in Florida for compliance. Okay, but we're getting ahead of ourselves with regard to the particulars. We're over time here. Unless anybody has a one last question, I'm going to wrap it up and say, you know, we'll get you good information next week. I'm going to talk to our leadership team about in New Jersey what we recommend for that initial deposit, how we're going to handle that. And then as soon as we get clarity in Florida, Colleen and our leadership team there will be getting us back that information as well. But we're only in April 12th. We have 3 months and 3 days, and we're probably one of the few brokerages that are having a meeting with, you know, 150 people to talk about how to resolve this. So I commend all of you. You're forward thinkers. You're investing in your career, and it's going to pay off big for all of you. Have a great weekend, everybody. I'll stay on for 2 more minutes if you have any other questions. Audra? Audra, did you have a question? All right, I'll see you later then.
Thank you,
Rob, I have
Rob.
a question or a comment.
All right,
I'd
go
like
ahead.
to- You know how we used to have sales meetings when I first started weekly? I think it would be important to start some of those again and just do a lot of practice and discuss on how to really present and maybe even some role playing.
Amen. I'm all for that.
Marilyn just sent an email out. There's a training meeting on Tuesday to go over the buyer agency agreement.
Where?
That's in Westfield. So I'm sure Mickey, Fran, Rebecca, or Fran Blakely could do something local for our Bergen County team. But yes, we're already on it. Thanks for acknowledging that, Audra.
No problem.
May we have one in Florida too, please?
Absolutely.
Yes. I'll be down there this week. Maybe you can see me.
Can we go to Westfield to attend that meeting?
Yeah, you can. You're welcome to.
We need that information though. Would you mind to forward that information to us? I mean, which date, time, something like that?
So I will have Vina send that to everybody, our new manager in Tinton Falls. She'll send that out to the Tinton Falls office. And Mr. Durso or Mr. Golden, if you can share that with your office. If you're not on the call now, I'll talk to you later this afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rob.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome.